Slavery is the most extreme form of control and subjugation of one person by another, most often enforced through violence. Slaves were usually acquired to provide labor and sometimes status for their owners and treated as property. The societies in which slaves lived accorded them few if any rights while granting their owners almost unlimited power over them. Even children could be separated from their mothers and sold to new masters far away. In particular, Louis van Mauritius was originally from Mauritius and was transported to the Cape when he was still a young innocent boy. He became a 19th century slave in the Cape Colony, which is referred to today as Cape Town. In his early 20s, he was owned by the landlord of a wine store on the foreshore, where he socialized with a diverse population of sailors and soldiers from throughout the Atlantic and Indian Ocean worlds. It was through these experiences that he listened to the significant events taking place in this era of revolutions and war, which included the slaves' uprising in Haiti. Inspired by the Haitian Revolution, Louis led the rebellion held on the 27th of October 1808. This was the first major attempt at overthrowing the slave-owning class and its militarized state in Cape Town. As such, it paved the way for first a less severe regime of slavery than what had been meted out before, and it was ultimately one of the factors that contributed to the abolition of slavery. Irishmen James Hooper and Michael Kelly informed Louis that slavery had already ended in Europe and the Americas. He had heard that in other countries all persons were free and there were so many black people here who could also be free, and he ought to fight for their freedom. Their plan was to march from the rural areas, gathering slaves and farm laborers on their way to Cape Town, where they would seize the Amsterdam. Once in control of the battery, they would turn their arms on the all-powerful castle and be in a position to negotiate on freedom for all slaves. On the evening of the 27th of October 1808, they assembled on the farm north of the town of Malmesbury. The two Irishmen disguised themselves as British officers, and Louis cut a fine figure as leader. He had acquired a naval uniform similar to that of Toussaint Louverture, leader of the Haitian Revolution. They managed to convince the wife of the first farm they went to hand over her husband's slaves for military duty. They then went from farm to farm convincing slaves and Khoi laborers to join the uprising, managing to put together a little army of more than 300. They moved quickly from farm to farm, therefore not much resistance could be enforced. Farms were looted, but no lives were lost and brutality was kept to a minimum. During raids, slaves would reverse the slave and owner role, calling white masters he and she instead of the more formal modes of address. Slaves were also on horses using shamboks on slave owners. They then marched to Cape Town, where they intended to hoist the bloody flag and fight themselves free. The authorities at the Cape, however, got the infantry and cavalry to lay a trap for them at Salt River, and 36 hours later the rebellion was thus quelled. Many rebels escaped, but 326 were captured by the troops, of which 51 were put on trial and the rest given over to their owners for correction by the governor, Lord Caledon. Louis van Mauritius and James Hooper were found guilty of treason and sentenced to death, along with 11 others who were found to have actively participated in the rebellion. While the other leaders contradicted each other in court, Louis stood by his beliefs in explaining himself. He argued that he kept discipline in the course of the revolt. He was sincere in his opposition to slavery and believed he conducted himself well, even though the courts labeled the act of rebellion as an evil deed. Michael Kelly seemed to have become a turncoat, and Louis's wife Anna died during the trial after becoming ill, possibly with stress and grief. While it may seem the revolt was unsuccessful, it was symbolic and a step forward for all enslaved in the Cape Colony from that point on. It was symbolic in the reversal of slave treatment that occurred during the takeover of slaves, the reconstruction of the owner and slave relationship, and indication that change was coming. In addition to the revolt, in October 2017, a bronze statue of Louis van Mauritius was erected in Pretoria as part of the Long Walk to Freedom collection. This statue was a reminder of the bravery and sheer tenacity of the slave known as Louis van Mauritius, who had been brought to the Cape as a toddler and slave, where he worked as a tailor when news came of a possibility of his freedom. Louis van Mauritius, impassioned by this news, organized an uprising. one that was small in size and scale, but which had managed to leave a mark in our history, making Louis van Mauritius deserved of his statue and a place next to the other great fighters of oppression.